Mr. Watts, he is armed himself. Shots. Shots. Watch it. Tear gas. Live rounds. Also, I can see that.
That's the window! Everyone is a boxer, man. I like your put in the boxer, man, to do that. But since my question there is no, you come on the East Coast.
You listen to me.
Right? No, you come on the East Coast.
You listen to me now.
You gotta listen to me too, man.
I am listening to you.
Now, I see you on the East Coast. The day when they get a protest of them, the next day, that's when you see one bigger heads come up to talk to my family. Right? And that's bad. If we didn't do a protest, we want to see nobody for justice. I'm not holding back nothing. I'm not holding back nothing. I just need justice of my family.
And a very good evening to you and welcome to Politics 101. Please share the link and let everyone know that we're on tonight. Tonight is WPA Groundings, and we'll be dealing with a number of issues with a panel of WPA members. Please share the link and let everyone know that Politics 101 is on.
You know, people ask me all the time, why do you do this? Why do you not retire and read books and write fancy academic papers? And I say, yes, that is also important. But what is more important is that I was given an opportunity to read books in the first place, to engage with ideas because of the sacrifices of ordinary people. And so part of scholarship must be given back to the people in the form of public engagement. See myself as a public scholar, what we call an activist scholar or a scholar activist, who's always trying to use the knowledge that is gained from reading books, from observing people in their communities, in their society, and giving them back, in the words of a UC Guyana, giving them back to the people as a political nourishment and by extension, cultural nourishment. That's what I'm about. It's about being that public scholar whose work is not just confined to the classroom, but that classroom is extended to the public space. I'm David Hart.
Nobody else can liberate the working class but the working class. Nobody else gives somebody else freedom. Freedom is something for which you fight, and then you win. If someone gives it to you as a gift, it is not really freedom. even those of us who stand on this platform can tell you that the remedy in Guyana is that a new set of people must take over from the old set of people, and we will run the system better. That is no solution to the problems of Guyana. The problem is much more fundamental than that. We are saying that working class people will get just only when they take the initiative, when they mold themselves. Nobody else can give it as a gift. Someone who comes claiming to be a liberator is either deluding himself or he's trying to delude the people. He either doesn't understand the process of real life, or he is trying to suggest that you do not understand it. And so long as we suffer from a warped concept of politics as being leadership, we are going to be in a lot of trouble.
In our society, the
I was speaking to myself all the time. Good evening and welcome to Politics 101. We come on here tonight with the background, the funeral of the late Dr. Walter Rodney, assassinated in 1980. That funeral procession from Buxton to Georgetown, it was felt that over 20 to 30,000 people marched behind his body to the cemetery in Georgetown, and we heard the voice of Walter Rodney there in the background. Good evening and welcome to Politics 101 tonight. Our show is the WPA. The WPA Speaks, WPA Groundings, as we call it. And we are going to have members of the WPA here tonight to answer questions on the political issues of the day. Please share the link and let everyone know that we're on as we assemble for WPA Groundings tonight. Dictatorship, dictatorship. Dictatorship. We are in a dictatorship.
And when we speak of civil liberties and civil rights, people are beginning to understand that the most fundamental of these is the right to work in our society. And what is occurring in Guyana is that the government is making political capital out of the indefensible position of one who is either unemployed or is very close to the line of being unemployed.
I want to say to you all, in no uncertain terms, that this government is disrespectful to black people. And if people disrespect you, you have a right to disrespect them.
I am saying now that we have started, now that we have come together, Do not sleep. Don't let us go back quietly into the night. Protest must be the order of the day.
And there we are, WPA Groundings tonight on a Monday night. Let me introduce our panel for tonight. Mr. Keith Branch, Executive Member of the WPA, Dion Abrams, who's no stranger to you, another executive of the WPA, and Takuma Ogunsi. Gentlemen, welcome to WPA Groundings.
Good night and thanks for having us on the program, Brother Hines, Dr. Hines.
Good night to you and your viewers, Dr. Hines.
Thank you very much. And let's get straight into the program. I'll start with you, Mr. Ogunsi. First of all, give our viewers an update on your trial. You went to court on the 27th of May. Tell us what happened.
Well, at the previous session, Council had raised the issue with the court that the charges were made under the section of the Act that deals, that doesn't deal with specifics. Therefore, the defendant had really nothing to really answer to. And he made that submission in the magistrate's asked for it to be in a written submission, and he did make it in a written submission. At the last hearing, the magistrate overruled the defense submission and fixed a date, the 11th. I'm pausing here because my notes say the 11th of July, but I saw a police report that said the 11th of June. I got to check that tomorrow with counsel. But on the 11th, either this month or next month, I'm supposed to return to court for the prosecution to lay over statements. And then the magistrate will fix a date for trial.
And of course, the submission by counsel was that that they charge you under the penalty section. That was his submission, that they charge you under the penalty section. And the magistrate did not accept that argument. She thought that she ruled that the charge was not bad in law, that it was good. I'll stand with you, Mr. Ogunsi. Let's start with the latest piece of information, latest piece of news that we have, and get the WPA's take on it. The High Court has ruled that the EPA must enforce the law and ensure that the oil company Exxon meets its requirement as far as protection against the environment. What is the WPA take on that ruling by the High Court and the fact that the government, not Exxon, according to the last report, Exxon said that it is considering what would be its next move, but the government on the very day came out and said it was going to appeal that case. And it has tongues wagging all over, including supporters of the government. What's the WPA take, first, on the ruling, and second, the government's response to the ruling?
The WPA was heartened that the court ruled in the interests of the nation. And we felt it was a correct ruling, which we support. So we had no problem at all with the ruling. In fact, we were glad that the court took the position it took to defend the interests of the nation. Now we're, well, I don't want to say we're surprised because we have been following the government's approach as it relates to Exxon and the oil industry. And nothing really surprised us in terms of PPP's behavior. But having said that, the party is concerned that the government, which is supposed to have its highest priority, the defense of the nation and the interests of the people, seems to be siding with the oil companies. And this we find to be very unpatriotic. And we think that the Guyanese masses of people and the various stakeholders in the country should take note and to join in the outcry, the condemnation of the government, to force them to retreat on this line of march. You know, it is very unpatriotic. And to an extent, it's embarrassing as a Guyanese that your own government could, you know, steep that low, you know. So that is
Mr.
generally
Ponce,
our attitude towards the
Mr.
ruling.
Ponce, where does your party stand on the issue of regime change in 2020 and the fact that some of these foreign political and economic interests were in collusion with the PPP in regime change? Should it be surprising that if the theory is correct, that these external forces help the PPP in government, would it not be logical for the PPP to defend their interests?
Yes, payback time. The WPA is clear on that. It is payback time, that the government is being very committed to its allies, you know, and for the government, as far as the government concerned, that commitment is above the interests of the Guyanese people. So it's their self-interest, and they have reduced everything to their self-interest and their partisan interests. So for us, we see it as payback time. So we can't we can't separate the government's present behavior from the way in which they came to power in 2020.
We cannot separate the way in which they came to power in 2020 and their present behavior. I think that is perhaps the most instructive thing in the government behavior, not only on this issue, but on other issues. But this year is so in your face, so naked, that even for a party like ours, which expect the government to pay back for those who help to put it in office. This, as you said, is very embarrassing as a Guyanese. Let me move to you, Mr. Keith Branch. On the next issue I want to get your party's take on, and that is the Commission of Inquiry set up by the PPP government into the elections of 2020. We saw the commission present its report to the government. The government made heavy weather of it for a couple of days, but of course nobody took them on, since the general view was that there was not much news here. Again, we go back to 2020 and what happened. What's the WPA's stake? First of all, in the setting up of the commission. Second, the terms of reference. And third, the findings of the commission.
Well, David, thanks. The Working People's Alliance had no interest in participating in the Commission of Inquiry that was set up by President Ali to look into the 2020 elections. Is that me?
No, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. The Commission of Inquiry was set up by the president apparently to bypass GCOM. GCOM is the legitimate instrument in Guyana for examining every election. And there can be no other instrument but GCOM. Therefore, our party wasn't interested in participating or paying much interest to what went on in the commission of inquiry.
I hear you.
The party's view on the setting up of the commission, was it legal? Was it acceptable for the government to set up a commission into an election in which the ruling party participated? What's your party's view on that?
Yes, our party feels strongly that the president, as I mentioned before, had no, there's a thin line, because the Constitution gave the president the authority to set up commissions of inquiry. But the Constitution doesn't give him a right to set up a commission of inquiry to examine an election that he was a chief participant in. He was a competitor in that election as head of the PPP's list. So our party feels that the president, bearing that in mind, knowing that GCOM is the sole authority for examining and reporting on every election in Guyana, that the president's COI, if it was not constitutional, it was not fair and in good stead.
What about the terms of reference that confined the commission only to events that happened on March 4th, March 5th at Ashmin?
It's even before that, Dr. Hines. The president, on setting up the commission of inquiry, said that the commission, that the persons selected to sit in the commission would draw up their own terms of reference, which was very illegal. When this was brought to the attention by Elder Guyana, they backtracked and said that's not so, that they're producing the terms of reference under which, no, I'm sorry, they didn't do that. The members of the commission did that and said that they are not writing their own terms of reference. So the government put together terms of reference that only focus on what transpired basically at the GCOM Ashmin building that was being used by GCOM to count the votes. The reason is the government did not want, the PPP did not want any investigation into the misconduct that took place outside of that. There were 47 boxes in that recount that were missing important documents, returning officer documents, scrutineer documents. Votes were bundled and in rubber bands in the ballot boxes. So the PPP did not want to go beyond that. And there was even the incident that happened on the East Coast, and I think Brother Hines, you were involved in that, where a youngster was caught voting several times. So the PPP knew that these things were taking place, and they weren't interested in having those things investigated, either on their own or with the colluders. They didn't want those things investigated, so they narrowed their so-called commission of inquiry into what transpired at the Ashmin building.
So, of course, if the WPA position is that the very setting up of the commission was illegal because one competitor, without consultation with other competitors, set up the commission.
Yes.
Second, the terms of reference was quite narrow. So it is obvious that the findings of the commission, your party do not accept them. Does not.
Yes.
All right.
Well, I mean, The WPA does not accept that, but I don't think the Guyanese people accept it.
Well, it depends on which Guyanese people you're talking about. I'm sure the supporters of the government will accept it, not because they necessarily think it's right, but of course, you know how our politics operate. Let me bring in Dion Abrams here. Mr. Abrams,
Yes, no.
WPA has been following the Ipadaji scenario, and you have been assigned by the party to oversee the development of that issue. We know that the subvention was withdrawn from Ipadaji. Ipadaji went to court. The court sent them to mediation. The government derailed the mediation, and it said that it would not give the money to Ipadaji, but to give the money to the organizations that are affiliated with Ipadaji. Ipadaji says it will not instruct its members what to do or what not to do as far as the money is concerned. What have you been picking up from the organizations? And I suppose as a member of one or more of those organizations, you would have had some direct communication with the government. Go right ahead.
Yes, Dr. Hines. The one other thing that you missed is that the government is arguing that the case that is put forward by Ipadaji is only focused on the subvention for 2022, not for this year, and not for the 2024. But Ipadaji's contention is that the case covers the period of the decade, the remaining period of the decade. And so there is a difference in terms of the view of the government in relation to Ipadaji's contention in relation to what is happening in the court. But for this 2023, Jack Dio, who seems to be the person pushing the idea that Ipadaji should not get a subvention, he did say, and he announced that the monies will be divided, the $100 million will be given directly to the organizations. And so subsequent to that, I don't know how it is that Ipadaji's database with information on the organizations and the telephone numbers of the representatives to Ipadaji on the organizations got into the hands of the government. But through the Ministry of Culture, Ramson's personal secretary, they sent letters to these organizations. I'm a member of several of them that are connected to the Ipadaji, and requesting that these organizations put forward proposals for receiving a portion of this $100 million. Some organizations have written to the government rejecting the proposal because we understand that the intent is to break a structured organization that has been focused on bringing to the country's African groups a united approach to the decade in confronting the government and in strengthening the capacity of these organizations to deal with things like contracts, to focus on rights and justice. And the last conference that Ipadaji held was focused on land, particularly the lands that are ancestral lands. And these are areas that government.
But Abrams, what is the what have they been calling these organizations? And as you're saying, and what from what you have picked up, what these organizations have been saying, doing? Have they been taking the money? Have they been rejecting the money?
No, I just said that the organizations, many of them have written to Ipadaji, to Ramson, telling them clearly that we are not going to accept the money. Others that have not written have not responded to the government in terms of sending proposals for the government to disperse money.
What is the WPA's position on the general issue? The WPA is obviously in disagreement with the way in which the government has operated. Tell us about that.
Before I get to that, Dr. Hines, I'm saying that because the response is not what the government and Jagdeo expected, they have resorted to calling the representatives of these organizations, the Party directly. I, for instance, got a phone call from the personal secretary of Ramson asking me if I received the email and that the minister wanted to know when I would respond to his email. I said if I were to respond, I would have responded already. You just tell him that there is no response that will be forthcoming. All right. And I know of other organizations that I've been a part of, that I am a part of, that have not responded in that way. So they now are directly contacting the organizations. Now, of course, the WPA, as an organization focused on the rights of all peoples, and in particularly under this dictatorial administration, this apartheid regime, we're focused on the African condition. And so we see this attempt by Jagdeo and the PPP to deny Ipadaji of a subvention that would continue to help the African community to move forward in relation to the UN's the decade as an attempt to put a spoke in the wheel of the progress of Afro-Guyanese in areas that are critical to their own development, and also to, by their actions, use a usual approach of divide to conquer. So they want to split the Ipadaji, put the organizations, those who are in favor of taking the deal against those who are not, and so on, but it is not working.
And what is the WPA's advice to the constituent organizations?
Well, we will advise them not to be, fall prey to the trap of Jagdeo. Because
and so you're advising them not to take the money.
Not to take.
Thank you very much. Let's come back to you, Mr. Ogunsi. Let's come back to you. We are now about 3 weeks into the local government election since nomination days. Last week when you appeared on this program, we talked about it. Since then, the APNU has done two things. One, it has launched its campaign yesterday, I think. And secondly, it has gone to court, asking the court to postpone the elections based on the gerrymandering that was carried out. The gerrymandering that was carried out by the Minister of Local Government, Mr. Darren Lal. We wait on Mr. Ogunsi.
Just wait a minute.
The local government election, we're talking about the WPA's position on the local government election. And last night, the PNC launched their election campaign. And they, of course, went to court. They went to court asking the court to find that the minister's actions were illegal. And that matter, I think, comes up on the 28th. There, of course, is the other matter that has to do with the voters list. And that matter, I think, is up next week. So the PNC, APNU seem to be walking on two legs, challenging the legality of the elections and at the same time preparing to contest the elections. I think Mr. Ogunse is back with us. Mr. Ogunse, your party, of course, took the position long ago that it would not participate in these elections, given the way in which the architecture is not set to guarantee free and fair elections. First, is WPA staying the course with that? And secondly, what are your thoughts on the issue of gerrymandering by the minister?
The WPA, of course, is staying our course. Our line of march continue to be what we have been arguing for over the number of weeks, that we should turn the day of June 12th into a day of national resistance and African uprising, and that people should find ways and means to make that manifestation be known, because we believe that that is the most profound way to deal with this problem. Because when we look at it, at all the other options, the government have a lot of control. Even if you enter the ballot, you vote.
We lost Mr. Ogunse.
Electoral parties, have their line of march, but we will continue our line of march and to argue that the masses should enter the equation and to make a statement that is clear, crystally clear, where they stand on this matter. Now, on the gerrymandering of the constituencies, we have took the position long before now that it is illegal. The minister don't have the powers to do that legally. GCOM also conceded that, but then GCOM went and did its thing, which eventually ended up with them ratifying what the minister did. But our concern is that the opposition, should, at the point of the intervention by the government, the opposition, should have really took very firm action, because I can't imagine in Jamaica, regardless of which party is in power, and tampering with the boundaries, electoral boundaries, the way in which the PP have done in Georgetown, which is a region 4, and so which is strategic for the opposition, that any opposition, any political party would have ignored that. That would be a major, moment of political struggle. And it passed in Guyana, it passed in the Guyanese style, and now we have to live with the consequences. And we were disappointed. I mean, we are not a major electoral party, but we really feel that the two major electoral parties on the opposition, both the PNC and the AFC, should have made, give a more serious response to that, tampering, because it is designed for one reason: to break the back of the opposition in Region 4 and to give the PPP an electoral advantage, by making it constituencies, reorganizing constituencies in a way that favor the demographics in favor of the PPP. And for us, that is a major struggle that should have been fought out in the streets. I mean, I'm glad that they have it in court, but courts are funny places. You could never be sure how courts will interpret these things. But the court is placed under more pressure when you go to court and the court is conscious that there was a major struggle in the streets on this matter. That is our position.
But Ogunse, the WPA obviously must have been paying attention to what's happening in the body politic, what's happening among the masses, what's happening inside of the opposition. The government, the coalition was kicked out of office in 2020. during the period of crisis, it made no attempt to negotiate for power or part of the power. When the PPP was installed, the opposition went underground and we saw divisions erupt. Now, 3 years later, is it fair to really go to the masses and tell them, fight for you? Isn't there, when we have seen over the last 3 years, the kind of fear that has been driven into the society, we take all those factors into consideration. Are we not at a critical period in our history where normal political contestation, as you were suggesting that it should be fought out on the streets, is really not on the table given the confluence of factors?
Well, okay, I think the WPA view it this way. We accept all what you said as part of the reality that or that the people coming out to the way in which the government was installed and the way in which the APMU, AFC conceded the elections have created a damper on the political activities of our constituents. And the aggressiveness of the government and the fear factor, they introduced the dismissals and the threat to use the police and to use the courts. All of that, amounts to creating a political atmosphere that is not readily available for public protests on the streets. But it is the duty of political parties to engineer political situations. You can't always wait until the most ideal conditions to get certain things going. And there's levels of protest. In the ideal conditions, I guess you get thousands on the road. In an engineer situation, you may get hundreds on the road. We don't buy why we accept the difficulties that is inherent in the political equation. We believe is more a question of leadership. Okay, we feel that the country and the masses have been schooled to depend on party and party leadership to take a direction, to give directions. And it is the failure of the party leadership to give the appropriate kinds of direction that is feeding into the reluctance of the masses, to come on the streets. So our view is that yes, those are real, limitations. But at the end of the day, political parties and political practitioners have to engineer, people's political responses at some time. And you also have to fight outside the ideal situation. If the enemy turn up at the door, you can't really tell yourself, I am ready for fight. I ain't got the best condition. You have to fight. The enemy is at the door.
You have to fight. Keith Branch, let me come back to you and talk a little bit about some of the reforms the WPA would like to see, particularly in GCOM, but general constitutional reform. I know that there is an ongoing discussion within the party as far as the issue of constitutional reform is concerned, but what would you like to see at GCOM in the short to medium term? And what general constitutional reforms would you like to see? Would the WPA like to see? You're muted.
But I think that's a question that deserves a lengthy answer. But I will try to summarize in as briefly as I could. First, with GCOM, the WPA believes that the chairperson of GCOM, Justice Retired Claudette Singh, is not the right person for that job at this time, and therefore she should go. The WPA also believes that there can be no effective election, local government or general and regional election, with a corrupted voters list.
How does the WPA propose that list be fixed?
the WPA firmly believes that a digital list based on the biometric data of individual electors should make up that list. Therefore,
should there be new house registration? Because the court has said that you can't remove people from the list, given the way in which the list of registrants and the electoral list are connected. How does the WPA propose that we cleanse the list of that over 200,000 extra people on there?
but you don't have to remove people from the list. What you have to do.
We get that. But how are you all in favor of legislation that gives GCOM the authority to generate its own list from house to house registration?
But I don't think that the party doesn't, the GCOM doesn't need any additional legislation to have house to house registration. I mean, that is part of the mandate of GCOM.
But the chairperson stopped those registration.
Yes.
Last time because the court intervened.
Yes. The court intervened in the house-to-house registration, not because it was illegal or outside of the mandate, but because the argument was that it would affect the 2020 elections.
The timeline.
The timeline.
Yeah.
So this is not something that has to be legislated. So the party strongly believes that the Working People's Alliance strongly believes that a new list extrapolated from the list of the voters registration list as it exists now, even without house-to-house registration.
But the court said you can't do that.
No, the court...
The court said if you do that, what you're doing is that you're disenfranchising people. The court is very clear on that.
All you're doing is presenting to the electorate the opportunity to have the biometric, to have voting by biometric. So even if you're on that list and you're not supposed to be on the list, you're dead, you're overseas, you're whatever reason you're not supposed to be voting, or you can't vote, then you wouldn't be able to, because the avenue by which the votes have been illegally what they call it, the illegal voting have taken place would be taken away from that the PPP and that group. Because
so you're in favor, your party is in favor of biometrics?
Is strongly in favor of biometrics. So the point I'm making is that the court has said, okay, you can't drop people from the list. But the WPA believes that you can do this without dropping people from the list. You have the list, but everybody on the list who is supposed to be going to the poll to vote has a biometric card, or the biometrics are in there. You go to the place of poll, you put your thumbprint, whatever is the thumbprint or by the optical things, methods that they use. You go there and you vote. If your thumbprint doesn't read your name and address or and your eligibility to vote, you can't vote. That's within the purview of the Ghana Elections Commission.
So, but I hope you're not saying that the WPA doesn't believe in cleaning the list. Biometrics helped, but biometric assumes that you still have the old list.
Yeah, biometrics is biometrics. Two things. One, you look if the if it's possible, and there's a no house-to-house registration, the WP believes, I mean, that's one of our first commitment, that there should be house-to-house registration. But if there's no house-to-house registration and they're biometric voting, that is also acceptable, because we know that the potential for the PPP to encourage their constituencies and the constituents to vote several times would be eliminated.
Would be eliminated. Is Mr. Abrams with us? Let me try to bring him in. Mr. Abrams, you've been going around with the WPA, holding public meetings in the last 2.5 months. What has the party been picking up on the ground as you have been holding these weekly meetings?
Well, basically, the exercise is to educate people on a number
But what have you been picking up as far as hearing from the masses? We know what you have been doing.
Yeah. Well, people have been very receptive of the message of the WPA. And they are particularly enthused by the fact that we are on this drive against GCOM and its current quest to manipulate the local government elections. And because our message is clear that this manipulation and all the displays of African Guyanese in red and so on is basically designed to rig in such a way, as Jagbio says, to take control of the strongholds of the APNU. And so when they rig it, they will use this display of Africans to say, this is based on the support that we've been having. And then that is set for further down the road in 2025, when they will rig again the national elections and again tout this idea that they have won over a massive support from the APNU strongholds. And so we have been telling people that we understand what the PPP has been doing, that, you know, they've given these temporary jobs to young people for $40,000 3 days a week. And then when they have all these occasions, like they would send text messages to them, telling them that they have to turn up at the party's office. And then they dress them in red jerseys and tell them that they have to accompany them on the march to present their list and these things. And they did the same thing when they had to go to Babu John and so on. So the style of governance is one of basically putting a rope around your neck. You're starving people of their ability to survive. You're giving them a pittance of $40,000, and then you are holding them to ransom by that pittance, telling them that they have to, you know, follow your dictates. And so they have all these photographs displayed. They have also been, people are also been very receptive of the fact that we are saying that there is need for resistance in terms of what is transpiring in the society. People are very concerned that the PPP is having its way, and there seems to be no pushback to what is happening in the society, that we are simply sitting back and taking this beating without any kind of resistance. And so our call for resistance at all levels is a welcome one. What we have to do is to convert that call into getting people really to come out.
Mr. Abrams, you could not be saying that the WPA has not been offering resistance, and there are pockets here and there of some heroic Guyanese citizens, both at home and abroad, who've been offering some resistance. It couldn't be that people were telling you all.
No, I'm not. I'm when I say resistance, I'm talking about resistance on a massive scale.
Well,
right?
Mr. Ogunse, your party comrade, demonstrated the ultimate resistance by putting his body on the line. Don't you see that as resistance?
Yeah,
The people could not be telling you,
Dr. Hines.
Yes. No, I'm
Brother
just taking
Ogun also
you with
said
what
we
you
need
said.
bodies on the streets. That we need
There are
bodies.
bodies on the streets at your political meetings. Mr. Ogunze, anything that you're learning as you went through the villages? In addition
Generally, people are, as Dion is trying to say, I think people welcome the fact that the WPA have been able to raise a direct challenge to the government. And people have a sense of kind of pride and a sense that, you know, for a long time, they haven't felt that there's something in the air that represents a fight back. So you have the militants who come out to the meetings and they are fully behind the campaign, okay, and they have committed themselves to work to do what they could do to make it a success. But you also have the sense that you deal with a population that have already made up his mind how it's going to deal with the elections on the 12th, and that they seems not to want too much of political directing. Their minds are very much made up. And if I'm to guess, because I only could guess, I think the bulk of the population decide that, you know, they're going to withdraw from these elections. They're not going to participate. That is the two kinds of responses we could read from the ground. That a lot of people seems to look, we understand what you all say, but we don't make up our mind about this thing. We ain't there nowhere near there. And the militants who want to make a statement and is hopeful that we could turn the 12th into a day that will mean something in the politics of the country.
Your message of tackling the race question openly and straight to the jugular, how has that been received?
That's been received well. The WPA really, historically, we have no problem. I think I don't know nobody would doubt it. We have been the party over the years that have demonstrated a willingness to openly address the racial problem in the society. And I think we could speak to any section of the country on this matter. And since a lot of the meetings have been directed to African communities, we have had no difficulties in convincing Africans on the line that we're arguing that this is not a contest between Africans and Indians, it's a contest between the African community and the wicked PPP leadership. And we have been making the point that in demonstrating our uprising, whatever form we choose to have it, we must be careful that we don't do anything, you know, that could offend Indian interests, or any physical attack on Indians, or any demonstrations in Indian communities. That all our activities, whatever form we choose to do, should be deliberately concentrated in African communities to avoid the PPP manipulation of the situation. And we think that our constituents who have been coming to the meeting buy into that and they understand it. And so they understand very well that while the WPA is also defending African interests at this moment, they understand that WPA have a wider national commitment, which involve Africans and Amerindians and other ethnic groups' interests.
Key branch is power sharing / shared governance still on the table as far as the WPA is concerned?
David, Dr. Hines, the WPA has never removed shared governance from its agenda. The WPA today, yesterday, in 1988, have firmly committed itself to a country where no one ethnic group or no one political group dominates the politics. It's regrettable that the present government during the 1970-1992 period were all in favor of some form of shared governance. The National Alliance, National Democratic Front, Patriotic Coalition, they were committed to that until 1992. And that went away. But for the Working People's Alliance, we're committed to a shared form of governance where every ethnic group in Guyana feels part of the country, part of the decision-making process, know that they are represented and has a voice in the government.
Brother Ogunse, the PPP has been paying a lot of attention to the WPA and the Attorney General. In some regards, the PPP saying that the tail is wagging the dog, in a sense saying that, the PNC is following the WPA and it's going to be bad for the PNC, etc., etc. How does your party see this new attention that's been paid to it by the political directorate?
I think the WPA position is that we earn it. And it's good that they're paying some attention to us. We earn it. And, in the politics of the country, the WPA have always at important juncture intervene. The problems that the PPP and the PPP types have is that they have, said that we're dead, and we're non-existent, and we're not important. And they suddenly wake up to recognize that we are much alive and that we are forced to be reckoned with. And we are not surprised at the attention. We knew what we seek to do. And we know once we do it, they cannot, engage us. They had to engage us. So we're not surprised because our action was very deliberate. And their response is consistent with our expectations. And for us, this is wrong one. If they believe that we have made them uncomfortable at present, they should prepare for wrong 2 and wrong 3.
Takumo Ogunse of the Working People's Alliance declaring here on Politics 101 that it is only round 1. It's only round 1. You've been tuning in to WPA Groundings tonight on a Monday night. The WPA sharing its views on the issues of the day. It's a dictatorship. It's a dictatorship. That's what we are saying tonight. The WPA doesn't feel that we have a creeping dictatorship, to use a term from the PPP 40 years ago. I start with you, Brother Branch. Is it a creeping dictatorship or a dictatorship?
But I would say 40 years ago, I had written an article for an international magazine, and I described the dictatorship in Guyana as a creeping dictatorship. And Brother Guyana never let me forget it. But no, the fact is that in Guyana, there's a full-fledged dictatorship. The People's Progressive Party and its government controls every facet of the Guyana Guyanese life. It's just 2 days ago, I think, Saturday, Friday. It must be may have been on Friday that the Minister of Public Information, I don't know what's his proper title, addressed the Guyana Press Association.
Yes.
And he told the Guyana Press Association, this is after Mr. Jagdeo has indicated that the reason why Guyana has such a poor press rating and so many issues is because of the press. And the Guyana Press Association and its affiliated groups are writing negative things about Guyana. And after that, Mr. McCoy went to the GPA and addressing them and telling them that they're going to form a parallel press association.
Wow.
You know, so here it is that they want to control the press, but unlike in previous times, and I think this is kind of confusing to some international viewers, because they think that you go stamp your foot in the press, shut down the printing presses, close down the media and so on. No, what they intend to do is to set up a parallel press association. So when you talk about the Guyana Press Association, when the international meetings and so on, you send your parallel press people. They have done that with the trade unions, the labor unions. They have set up a parallel labor union, and on Labor Day, when the heads of the leaders of the trade unions normally meet with the people to organize the parade, it is at that exact time that the President Ali decided that he's going to invite them to breakfast. So these things undermine the people's organizations, and because of that, it gives the government an unhealthy control over all facets. Let's take the EPA. Brother Ogunse touched on the EPA earlier. The EPA, as existed prior to 2020, had a lot of flexibility and independence. When the PPP came into office, they gutted the EPA. They gutted almost all the professionals, the senior clerical staff, admin staff. They got rid of all of them. They put their own people in there. And the decision by the judge on the Exxon insurance issue is prominent, but we have to remember that the government has been doing this for nearly 3 years. You remember in Clonbrook it's at Clonbrook where they're going to set up that factory to spray the villagers with the toxin chemicals,
right?
And they had to shut that down, and then they went to Houston, and Van der Radzik and others got them to the court to decide that they have to have an environmental impact study.
Yeah,
so they couldn't have that. So all of these areas that affect the lives of Guyanese people, the government has sought to control. I mean, look at the National Resource Fund. They withdraw 500, how many millions earlier this year? Now they want to go back for another 60 million. And the law is that the Minister of Finance should report after every drawdown. There have been no report so far. So,
and Brother Ogunse, dictatorship?
Yes. Yeah, we are past dictatorship. I think we're moving into a fascist kind of a government. I particularly the PPP is at a point where they're not satisfied with simply being a dictator, where you use the state, in a way that oppress people and reduce people's rights and freedoms. But they have made a significant shift to fascist politics, where they're not satisfied with that. They do like what Hitler, Mussolini, and them practice. They accuse the opposition with a clear lie, which they know is a lie, and then they use the power of the state to force the country, all the institutions, to jump and support them with the lie. Okay, and to beat you down if you decide to resist. So what they want they force the masses to participate in their own, oppression. And this is key. The people is not simply satisfied with simply being a dictator. We take away your rights. we give you a hard time, we reduce civil liberties, we dominate everything. No, we want you to come out and embrace us and embrace your domination. And I think this is the dangerous point. We have entered into seriously dangerous political reality, which I don't think the country is very much aware of. So when politicians reach that stage, you're not talking about dictatorship, you're talking about fascism.
Fascism. Dion Abrams, dictatorship.
Yes, Dr. Hines. We see it in every facet of life. We talked about the media, or the control of the media. The drive now is to take total control of the arms of the state through which they can intimidate and drive fear in people. And we're talking about the armed forces, the police and the army and so on. Their way of dealing with those institutions is by implanting into them people whom they believe are supportive of the PPP. Like in the police force, they're putting Indians into the force, which we don't have a problem with. But within a month, 2 months, 3 months, they haven't served, they haven't been properly, ingrained into the workings of the force, and they're promoted above people who have been there for years. They're given rank above people who are supposed to be their seniors. They have been maligning people who are supposed to be promoted, and we only recently we had a senior police officer who died. What's his name again?
Cooper.
Yes,
Cooper.
right? Cooper. And then we have officers going overseas to be trained in the military, the army, to become better equipped at managing the army. But when they come back, they're not sent back to the institution. They're isolated in some government office so that their knowledge and skill cannot be imparted to the institution for which they were prepared and trained. And it's really this kind of thing that is particularly worrying, because we see from the statements of Jagdeo that you must lock them up. And if you lock them up, just lock up a couple of them, and then all of them gonna be quiet and they're gonna run in the corner. Those were the statements that came out of his mouth after they accused Brother Ogun of making statements that were what they called treasonous and so on. And they have demonstrated that the idea of putting fear into people by their treating with the Quendon Bacchus protests on the East Coast, where they have gone into the village after the protests. They set up the agents to do what they did at Luzikna, and thereby creating conditions for them to say that these people are, a peaceful protest, but they always put people in the protests to do the dirty work, and then they make their accusations. They're good at that. And then they went into Golden Grove and terrorized the people. And after that, charged 12 persons with terrorism.
And
right?
12 plus 1, Ms. Robin
Right.
Simon. Before we go, Dion, and next week we're going to deal more at length with it, the government has launched, the Ministry of Education has launched a literacy project just down the road from you there at Enterprise Bachelor's Adventure area. I understand that this is going to be a 2-week program. Can you do anything with the kind of literacy that you know, or lack of literacy in the school? Is 2 weeks enough for a literacy program?
These are just ways of siphoning off monies, and pretending that you're doing something. You will see the budget for it when it's done. That money will not be accounted, but it will be a humongous sum.
It
All
will
right.
be a humongous sum. Next week, I'm going to, I know you're ready to go off on it, but time is gone. Next week, I promise you that you will come on and I will give you maximum time to deal with that issues, because sometimes we politicians deal with the political issues, and those political issues are happening in the communities and we don't pay attention. But you're an educationist. I am an educationist of sorts too, so I pay attention to those things. Next week we're gonna go at length. But right away, audience, you see where Mr. Abrams went. It's a money-making thing for their friends and family. Walter Rodney started off our program tonight by talking about the government taking advantage of people's unemployment and underemployment. And I play these things. I've gone into my archives and pulled out these things, because these things were true, were uttered 40 odd years ago. And it's as if Rodney has come out from the grave and speaking to the PPP government. Thank you all for staying with us, and thank you, members of the WPA, for coming on tonight and sharing with us your views on the issues of the day. Until next week, I'll see you all, and to you, my audience, as usual, keep the faith. Tomorrow night, Henry Jeffrey is going to be here with his take on what's going on in our country.
When we speak of civil liberties and civil rights, people are beginning to understand that the most fundamental of these is the right to work in our society. And what is occurring in Guyana is that the government is making political capital